The day that should have been the happiest of my life, turned into the day my world shattered. At my baby shower, surrounded by balloons, gifts and smiling faces, my sister stood up and revealed a secret so devastating that it destroyed the very foundation of my marriage and tore my family apart. What she never expected was how I would respond that day, and the life I would build after. The sound of shattered glass still echoes in my head. I can still see the crystal punch bowls sliding off the decorated table, the sparkling red liquid spilling like blood across the white satin cloth. The room froze that moment, and I felt every eye stabbing into me, as my sister's words tore through the air like a knife I never saw coming. I stood there, heavy with child, one hand resting on my round belly, while the other trembled so violently, I thought I might collapse. My baby shower, the day I had dreamed would celebrate new beginnings, turned into the funeral of my illusions. My heart thundered so loudly, it drowned out the laughter that had died instantly, leaving behind a suffocating silence. I could not breathe. The air seemed to thin out, leaving me trapped in a suffocating bubble of disbelief. My sister's voice still rang in my ears, sharp and merciless, exposing a truth that was meant to stay buried. It was not the kind of secret you ease into, not the kind you whisper with caution. She had chosen to shout it into my world, like a grenade tossed in a crowded room, watching it explode with destructive glee. The balloons, the pastel ribbons, the carefully wrapped presents stacked neatly against the wall, everything that once looked so beautiful now appeared mocking, cruel and meaningless. The people who had gathered, women from my church group, neighbors, aunts, cousins, even my mother sitting with her fragile smile, every one of them had transformed in an instant into silent witnesses of my humiliation. I saw pity swimming in their eyes, but pity was more unbearable than scorn. I remember gripping the edge of the table to steady myself, the satin tablecloth bunched beneath my fingers, sticky with spilled fruit punch. I pressed hard enough that my nails cut into the fabric, desperate to anchor myself to something real, while my mind spun out of control. My baby shifted inside me, a sharp reminder that I could not crumble, not yet. I had to remain standing, even though every part of me wanted to collapse to the floor and scream until my throat bled. It was not just the announcement that broke me, it was the way she looked at me, after she spoke. My sister's eyes carried no remorse, no hesitation. She stood tall in her expensive dress, her lips curled in satisfaction, her chin slightly raised, as though she had finally claimed a victory she had long been waiting for. I had loved her, I had defended her, I had trusted her with parts of my soul no one else had touched, and she chose that very moment, my celebration, to gut me open in front of everyone who mattered to me. In the chaos of my thoughts, images rushed through my mind. I saw myself as a little girl, holding her hand while we crossed the street. I saw us sharing secrets under a blanket with a flashlight, when we were supposed to be asleep. I saw us mourning our father together, leaning on each other for comfort. My sister had been my shadow, my anchor, the other half of my childhood, and now she stood across from me, tearing away the ground beneath my feet. I wanted to scream at her, but my throat locked. I wanted to deny it, but my trembling hands betrayed me. Deep inside I knew she was not lying. The truth was already there, waiting in the shadows of my marriage, waiting to be uncovered. I had ignored the subtle signs, the unexplained absences, the coldness that grew between me and my husband. I had pushed away the nagging suspicions, because I wanted so desperately to believe in love, in family, in the promise of forever. The room remained frozen, a tableau of judgment. I felt like a specimen under glass, stripped of dignity, forced to endure the slow burn of everyone's stare. My mother lowered her gaze to her lap, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. My cousins whispered behind their hands, their faces pale with shock. Someone in the corner sniffled, the sound sharp in the heavy silence. It was as if my baby shower had turned into a grotesque performance, and I was the unwilling star. Inside me, anger began to rise, hot and corrosive. Anger at my husband, who had planted the seed of this betrayal. Anger at my sister, who had watered it with her venom. Anger at myself, for being blind, for being naive enough to trust, for walking into the fire without recognizing the smoke. I wanted to claw the air, tear down the decorations, and scream until the walls crumbled, but I did nothing. I stood there, rigid, trembling, my nails digging into my palms until I felt the sting of broken skin. I could hear my pulse hammering in my ears, a relentless drumbeat. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not cry in front of. I would not give my sister that satisfaction. I would not give anyone the power to see me broken in that moment. If I was going to fall apart, I would do it behind closed doors, where the walls could contain my shame. Still I could not move. I could not. My body felt like stone, my feet cemented to the floor. The silence stretched on, unbearable, and I knew everyone was waiting for me to react, to scream, to collapse. But I gave them nothing. My silence was my shield, even as it burned me from within. What my sister revealed was not just a betrayal, it was a fracture in the foundation of everything I had built my life upon. My marriage, my family, my future, it all cracked open with her words. She had not just exposed my husband's secret, she had exposed the fragility of my trust, the illusion of my happiness, and the cruel truth that those you love most are often the ones who destroy you. As I stood in that ruined celebration, surrounded by the suffocating weight of eyes, I felt something inside me shift. A part of me was dying, the innocent part, that believed love was safe, that family was sacred, and in its place, something new was being born, something fierce, raw, and unyielding. My sister may have thought she destroyed me that day, but what she truly did was awaken a side of me I never knew existed. The punch bowl lay in pieces at my feet, the sticky liquid seeping into the rug, staining it forever, just like that moment would stain me. I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The silence of that day haunted me long after the last guest left my house. The walls seemed to echo the whispers, the gasps, and the unspoken judgments that floated through the air like invisible daggers. I walked through the wreckage of balloons, half-eaten cupcakes, and stained tablecloths, as though I were drifting through a graveyard of broken illusions. What was meant to be a celebration of life felt instead like a ceremony of mourning. I could not tell if I was grieving my marriage, my sister, or the part of myself that would never again trust blindly. That night, when the house finally grew quiet, I sat in the nursery. The pale yellow walls that I had painted with such care now looked harsh under the dim light of the lamp. The crib stood ready, dressed with soft blankets and plush toys, a promise of joy that now felt almost cruel. I ran my hand along the wooden frame, feeling its smooth edges, and wondered how many other mothers had rocked themselves between love and betrayal, between hope and despair. My baby shifted inside me, reminding me that innocence still lived, even as my world was unraveling. I thought of my husband then. His absence was louder than any words he could have spoken. He was not there to defend himself, not there to shield me from the public unveiling of his secret, not there to catch me when the weight of humiliation nearly drove me into the floor. I imagined his face, the lines of his jaw, the eyes that once promised me safety. Where was he when my world collapsed? Did he know what my sister had planned, or was he as blindsided as I was? The questions gnawed at me, carving holes in my chest that no answer could fill. And then there was my sister. Even in my fury, I could not erase the image of her face as she stood across from me that day. The same face I had known since childhood, the same eyes that once sparkled with laughter when we played in the sprinklers on hot summer days, the same lips that once whispered secrets about first crushes and broken hearts. How could the girl I once trusted with my soul grow into the woman who crushed me so publicly? Our history pressed against me like a heavy quilt. I remembered the night our father died, when I was 13 and she was 11. We sat on the staircase of our childhood home, listening to our mother sob behind closed doors. I had pulled her into my arms, promised her that I would always protect her, that we would never let the world break us. That promise had carried me through the years, even when life grew hard. I had carried her through heartbreaks, through failures, through storms of her own making, and now in return she had chosen my most vulnerable moment to strip me bare. I began to wonder if it had always been this way, if jealousy had threaded itself through her veins long before I noticed. I thought back to high school, when I had been crowned homecoming queen, and she stood in the shadows, smiling but not smiling. I remembered the way she had looked at my wedding, her eyes glimmering with something sharp beneath the veil of celebration. And I remembered the coldness in her voice whenever I shared good news, as if my happiness was a personal insult to her suffering. The signs had been there, but I had blinded myself with loyalty. Now, sitting in that nursery with my hands resting on my swollen belly, I realized how much of my life had been shaped by loyalty to my husband, to my sister, to the fragile idea of family unity. I had built my identity around protecting and preserving the bonds that tied us together even when those bonds were fraying. But loyalty had become my downfall. It had allowed betrayal to grow unchecked, hidden beneath the surface until it burst out in the most vicious way possible. The weight of my sister's revelation lingered in my chest like poison. I tried to replay her words, but my memory faltered. It was not the exact wording that destroyed me, but the intention behind it. She had wanted me exposed, humiliated, shattered. She wanted my perfect life stripped of its illusion so that her bitterness could finally breathe. What secret she revealed was painful, but the deeper wound was that she delivered it with glee. I could not stop thinking about the women in that room, the way their eyes shifted from me to her and back again, torn between sympathy and hunger for scandal. I could imagine their conversations after they left, how they would tell their husbands, their friends, their own sisters. My pain had become their entertainment, my downfall their dinner story. And I knew once a secret is spilled in public, it cannot be gathered again. But beneath the humiliation a darker thought began to bloom. What if my sister had not just revealed his secret to wound me, What if she did it because she wanted what was mine? The thought unsettled me, but it would not go away. I began to wonder if my sister's cruelty had roots deeper than rivalry, if perhaps she saw my marriage not only as fragile, but as something she could claim for herself. I wrapped my arms around my stomach, instinctively protective. My baby was the only pure thing left in this tangled mess. The child inside me had no part in this betrayal, no hand in the bitterness that tore my family apart. But innocence is always caught in the crossfire of secret. I wept silently then, tears slipping down my cheeks, as I vowed that my child would never know the taste of such venom. The hours stretched into morning, and I still sat in that room, my thoughts gnawing at me. I realized that my sister's betrayal was not an isolated act. It was the culmination of years of unspoken resentment, of small wounds ignored, of a rivalry that I never admitted existed. She had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and she had chosen the day when my heart was most open, when my joy was most fragile. But if she thought I would crumble, she was mistaken. Something inside me was shifting, hardening. I could feel it in the way my tears dried, in the way my heartbeat steadied, in the way my breath grew less shallow. Pain was shaping me into something sharper, something less forgiving. I would not be her victim forever. I would not let her define the rest of my life by the moment she chose to destroy me. Still, I could not ignore the truth of her revelation. My husband's secret, now dragged into the light, had split open the foundation of my marriage. I could no longer hide behind hope or denial. My home was not a sanctuary, but a stage where betrayal had been rehearsed in silence until it was ready for its violent debut. As dawn crept through the blinds, painting the walls of the nursery in soft stripes of gray, I whispered to myself a vow. I would find out everything. I would trace every shadow, uncover every lie, and piece together the story that had been kept from me. I would not let shame keep me blind, and when I had the whole truth, I would decide whether to forgive, to fight, or to burn it all down. But this time it would be my choice, not my husband's, not my sister's, not anyone else's. My baby kicked sharply as if to remind me that the future was still mine to shape. I rose from the chair, steady on my feet now, and touched the crib once more. The weight of betrayal was heavy, but inside it burned a strange new fire. I did not yet know what I would become, but I knew I would never again be the woman I was before that baby shower. Secrets do not remain hidden once they have been dragged into the light. They spread, curling into every corner of your life, twisting even the quiet moments into a constant reminder of what has been broken. In the days after my baby shower, I felt as though I was living in a house with shattered windows. Every gust of wind carried whispers, every shadow seemed to hold judgment, and every memory replayed itself with new, sharper edges. I could no longer avoid the truth of what my sister revealed. Her voice echoed in my mind, relentless and cruel. She had stood in front of everyone I loved, and declared that my husband had been unfaithful, not just in passing, not in some meaningless way, but in a betrayal so deep it carried consequences I had not been prepared to face. He had not simply strayed, he had fathered a child with another woman. The words replayed again and again, stabbing me each time. My husband, the man I had trusted with my life, had given what was sacred between us to someone else. And now, somewhere beyond the walls of my home, there was another child, carrying his blood, living proof of the betrayal I had chosen to ignore. I could still see the smirk on my sister's face when she spoke, the way her eyes glinted with satisfaction. It was not merely exposure, it was revenge. She had wanted to ruin me, and she had succeeded, but her triumph did not erase the raw, sickening truth that my husband had betrayed me long before her announcement. In the quiet hours of the night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to trace back every moment, every sign I had ignored. The late nights at the office, the sudden trips, the empty look in his eyes when he held me. I had told myself he was tired, overworked, distracted. I had convinced myself that every suspicion was a reflection of my own insecurities, not of his actions. I had fought to keep the peace, to keep my marriage whole, even as it cracked beneath the weight of secrets. Now I realized, I had been fighting for something that was never real. The nursery that once brought me comfort, now felt suffocating. The crib was no longer a symbol of hope, but a reminder of the twisted complexity of my future. My baby would enter a world already tainted by betrayal, a world where siblings existed outside the walls of our home, tied by blood but born of treachery. I pressed my hand against my belly and wondered how I would explain this one. How do you tell your child that their father's love was not theirs alone, that it was shared in secrecy with another family? The shame burned me, not because of what he had done but because everyone now knew. My mother's eyes told me she pitied me, my cousins whispered about me, and the women from church no longer looked at me with warmth but with that quiet curiosity reserved for gossip, that taste too sweet to resist. My pain had been laid bare, and there was no retreat from it. Yet beneath the humiliation, a darker realization began to form. My sister had not stumbled upon this truth by accident. She had carried it, nurtured it, and chosen her moment of attack with precision, which meant she had known for longer than I had. She had known my husband's secret, and she had chosen to keep it from me until the day she could use it to destroy me. The thought was unbearable. Betrayal from my husband was agony, but betrayal from my sister was poison. I thought of all the times she had come to my home, the way she looked at him, the faint curve of her smile when he entered the room. My stomach churned with a sickening suspicion, one I tried to push away but could not. What if her cruelty was not just born of jealousy? What if she was more entangled in his secret than I realized? The possibility carved into me like ice. I avoided my husband in those days. His presence felt like a blade at my throat, and I could not bear to look him in the eye. He had not yet spoken to me about the revelation, had not tried to deny or explain. His silence was its own confession, and so I drifted through the house like a ghost, tending to my swollen belly, waiting for the storm that would inevitably. The turning point came one evening when I stood in front of the mirror. My face looked older, harder, the glow of pregnancy dimmed beneath the weight of betrayal. I stared at my reflection, and realized that I was no longer the woman I had been before my baby shower. That version of me was gone, buried under the rubble of secrets. What remained was a woman scarred, but still standing, a woman who would no longer let her life be dictated by the lies of others. That was the moment I made my decision. I would no longer wait for truth to find me. I would go after it myself. I would uncover every hidden detail, peel back every layer of deceit until I stood in the naked light of reality, no matter how much it burned. I owed myself that. I owed my child that. I began with my sister. I replayed her words, her posture, the venom in her smile. I thought about how she had known, how she had carried that knowledge, and how she had chosen to use it, and as I pieced it together, the suspicion I tried to silence grew louder, clearer, undeniable. My sister had not just revealed my husband's betrayal, she had relished it, because she was part of it. The walls of my home seemed to close in as the truth pressed down on me. My husband had betrayed me, my sister had betrayed me, and together they had carved wounds into my soul that would never fully heal. I pressed both hands against my belly, trembling as my child kicked against me. The life inside me felt like both a burden and a lifeline. I whispered to myself that I would endure, that I would not let them destroy me completely, but inside a storm was brewing, a storm that would not rest until every truth was laid bare, and every mask was torn away. This was no longer just about betrayal, it was about survival, and I would not go down quietly. The morning after I vowed to find the whole truth, I moved through my house, like an archaeologist in my own life. I opened drawers, sifted through folders, and studied the dust lines that betrayed what had been moved and what had been hidden. It felt strange to examine the quiet spaces of a home that had once felt safe. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like a confession. Every envelope felt heavy with the weight of a future I had not agreed to. I kept one hand on my belly as I searched, steadying myself with the pulse of the child within me. I told myself that I was not doing this to break my family. I was doing it because it was already broken, and I needed to know exactly where the cracks were. In the office closet, behind old holiday decorations, and a box of framed photos we never got around to hanging, I found a small fireproof safe. The key was not far. I knew where he kept it, because I had trusted him then, because I believed there were no doors between us. I unlocked the safe, and felt the cold metal click under my fingers. Inside, there were documents arranged with careful precision. There were tax forms, title papers, insurance cards, and then tucked beneath a stack of bank statements, there was a manila envelope that did not belong to our shared life. My hands shook as I slid it free. There were receipts from a hospital across the river, not the one near our home, but a smaller one 2 towns over. There were parking stubs and discharge instructions stamped with dates that matched his late nights and sudden errands. There was a tiny hospital bracelet, curled like a white ribbon in the corner of the envelope. The plastic was still stiff, the printed name was faded but legible. The surname was his. The first name was one I did not recognize. The mother's name was printed smaller, as if the machine understood shame. I stared at those letters until they blurred, and then I stared harder until they came back into focus. It was my sister's name. The room tilted, the air thin. I pressed my back against the wall and slid to the floor, clutching the bracelet in my fist as if it might dissolve if I loosened my grip. A sound escaped me that I did not recognize. It was not a sob and not a scream. It was the low, raw sound of a person, realizing she has been betrayed by 2 people she would have defended at any cost. A cold clarity moved through me like winter water. I did not have to imagine anymore. I did not have to replay old suspicions or decode old glances. The truth was in my hands, hard and plastic and undeniable. I spread the contents of the envelope across the office rug, There were bank transfers labeled as rent, childcare and health insurance premium. There was a lease for a small apartment under a property management company I had never dealt with. The tenant name was not my sister's. It was a variation, a middle name tucked into a last name that did not belong to our family. But her date of birth sat on the page like a fingerprint she forgot to wipe away. There was even a single photograph, glossy and cruel. He was holding a bundled newborn. The smile on his face was gentle and careful, like a man trying to hold happiness without being seen. I scanned the edges of the photo as if it might reveal mercy. It revealed instead a corner of a hospital bassinet card, with my sister's handwriting. I knew her loops, I knew the tilt of her letter. I had helped her with school projects when we were young, watching those same loops as she traced poster boards with glitter pens. The betrayal was not abstract anymore. It had shape and texture. It had addresses and timestamps. It had ink and plastic and proof. My heart did not break again. It hardened. I felt the shift as surely as I feel the shift in seasons through the tall maples outside my kitchen window. I was no longer asking why. I was preparing for what came next. That afternoon, I packed a small overnight bag and placed it by the front door. Inside were comfortable clothes, my prenatal folder and a copy of the evidence sealed in a second envelope. I stood for a long time in the doorway of the nursery. The pale yellow walls seemed softer in the daylight. The mobile above the crib turned slowly from the draft, and the felt stars brushed each other in a silent rhythm. I rested my forehead against the door frame, and let the wood cool my skin. I was not going to let the actions of two adults determine the atmosphere of this room. This room would be a place where secrets did not slither under the rug. This room would be a place where truth breathed. I drove to the apartment, listed on the lease as the mailing address. The neighborhood was quiet and plain, a row of modest buildings with cracked sidewalks and heavy mailbox. I sat in my car for a moment, and watched the way the afternoon sun fell across the doors. I imagined the months that had unfolded here while I set up a registry and painted a nursery. I imagined the arrivals and departures, the routines built around a life I did not know existed. I did not need to. It was enough to see the drape of a blanket in a window, the shape of a teddy bear sitting on the sill, the wind chime made of shells that my sister had loved when we were children. I felt the steady push of my child beneath my ribs, as if urging me to leave, to preserve the calm space I had carved around us. I did not want a scene. I did not want an audience. I had lived enough in the glare of other people's eyes. I wanted a record. I wanted a line drawn in permanent. On the way home, I stopped at a notary and made certified copies of every page. I felt each stamp like a small drumbeat of control returning to my body. Then I drove to the lake where I used to run on weekends, and I sat on a bench under a cottonwood tree. The water was a single rower cut through the surface, smooth and determined, leaving a clean wake that slowly disappeared. I watched that wake vanish, and I made myself a quiet vow. My response to their choices would not be a spectacle. It would be a structure. I reached out to an attorney whose name I had saved for work reasons years ago, back when I still believed such names were for other people's emergencies. I sent the documents with a calm, factual summary of the last month. I requested a separation agreement, a temporary support plan, and clear boundaries for contact. I asked for my options regarding my child's birth certificate and medical decisions. Then I messaged my therapist and booked a double session. I messaged my mother with a simple update that I would be stepping back from family gatherings for a time. I did not send my sister a message. Silence became the only language I trusted with her. 2 nights later, the contractions began. They came as a deep ache that wrapped around my lower back, then sharpened as if a belt were tightening from the inside. I moved through the house in slow circles, breathing in a steady pattern I had practiced during classes where I once imagined my husband's hand would steady my shoulder. The clock on the oven ticked through the night. The house held its breath with me. When the intervals shrank and the ache turned into force, I picked up the bag from the door and drove to the hospital under a sky the color of unspun wool. The delivery room was bright and clinical, yet it felt like a chapel. I laid the envelope of documents on the tray beside the monitors. It felt strange to bring the artifacts of one life into the room where another would begin, but it also felt honest. My child was entering the world not as a patch over a wound, but as a sunrise after a storm. Nurses moved in efficient patterns, checking monitors, adjusting blankets, anchoring me to the present with gentle hands and practiced steps. I closed my eyes through each contraction and pictured the lake again, the clean wake, the way the water calmed after disturbance. Hours later, when the arc of pain reached its crest and then split open into something beyond language, I let the sound inside me rise. It was not a scream of anger. It was a roar of arrival. When the room filled with the sharp, miraculous cry that followed, I felt every shattered piece inside me shift into place around that sound. The baby was placed on my chest, warm and damp and furious with life. I touched the soft curve of a cheek with the back of my finger and felt the first true peace I had known in months. Afterward, in the hush that follows birth, I made decisions. I listed myself as the primary guardian. I left the space for the father's name blank for the moment, not out of spite but out of care for legal clarity and my own healing. I authorized the first vaccinations. I asked a nurse to take a photograph of us in the light that fell across the bed from the high window. I wanted proof that a new story began here, not in a decorated living room with a punch bowl, but in a quiet room scented with antiseptic and skin and promise. Word reached people anyway, as it always does. A bouquet arrived with a card I did not open. A pair of messages landed on my phone from numbers I knew by heart. I turned the screen face down and watched my child sleep with little twitching breaths and tiny fists curled like commas at the end of a long sentence. I understood then that my response had already begun on the day of the shower, even when I stood in silence. It was not the sound I made or the words I refused to utter. It was the decision I made in my bones. I would not perform my pain for anyone. I would build my future in quiet, steady steps that did not ask the permission of those who broke me. When I was discharged, I drove home on a wide Midwestern road, lined with bare oaks and salt-streaked asphalt. The sky was clear, the winter sun sat low and bright, washing everything in pale gold. I carried my child over the threshold and into the nursery, and the room received us like a promise kept. I moved slowly, learning the shape of our days without outside voices. Feedings and naps drew their own private constellations across the hours. In the afternoons, I stood by the window and let the light find us. At night, when the soft cries rose like small waves, I walked the hallway and counted my steps, teaching my body that we would move forward one measured length at a time. The practical fallout arrived with the same steady pace. There were meetings over video with my attorney, forms to sign, financial disclosures to gather, a temporary custody schedule to draft that reflected real life, and not paper wish. There were conversations with my employer about a revised leave plan that did not involve the support I had once expected at home. There was a frank, quiet budget spread across my kitchen table, with columns for essentials and columns for things I would release without resentment, because freedom is more valuable than ornamental comfort. My mother visited once and sat at the edge of the couch with her hands folded, eyes soft and wet with a grief that had nothing performative in it. She touched the baby's foot and then my shoulder and stayed only a few minutes. On her way out, she paused in the doorway, and I saw in her the long, complicated thread of our family line. I understood that love could remain even where trust had been cauterized. I would allow that love to exist, but I would not let it drag me back into rooms where my dignity could be Weeks passed. The legal process moved forward. There were messages from my sister that I did not open. In the quiet hours, I imagined the scripts she might be auditioning for herself. Remorseful confessor, misunderstood victim, brave truth teller. I did not care which one she tried on. I did not need her performance. I needed the life I was building to be free of the theater that had consumed us. I boxed the last of her gifts from the shower and set the box by the door for donation. Objects hold memory like cloth holds scent, and I wanted my home to smell like milk and detergent and new skin, not like old scenes. A letter arrived one morning, hand-delivered by a courier. It contained the preliminary agreement I had asked for. It also contained the results of a paternity test I had not requested, but that had been filed in the other matter, the one that began with a hospital bracelet and a faded photograph. I read the percentages and the signatures, and the dates. The numbers carried the heavy math of consequence. There was no relief in them and no shock, only confirmation. The other child was his, and the mother was my sister. The facts sat on the page like stones. I stacked those stones where they belonged, outside the door of my heart. The climax of this story did not look like a slammed door or a shouted confession. It looked like a signature. It looked like a key placed on a granite counter. It looked like a woman handing a baby to her own shoulder and swaying in a small kitchen, while the winter light moved across the floor in quiet squares. It looked like boundaries rooted deeper than rage could loosen. It looked like a future refusing to carry what did not belong to it. I thought often about that moment at the baby shower, the sound of glass shattering, and the red punch spilling like a wound across the cloth. I understood now that the most powerful response I made that day was not a declaration or a dramatic gesture. It was restraint. It was the refusal to let humiliation draft my script. It was the stillness that made room for a truer strength to grow. My sister never expected that. She expected a spectacle. She expected to center herself within my room. Instead, I stepped out of the scene she tried to write and authored a different ending. In time, the paperwork became a decree. The marriage ended on paper the way it had ended long before in practice. Arrangements were set in place to protect my child's stability. There were calendars and clocks and clear instructions about pickups and drop-offs. There were consequences that belonged to adults and protections that belonged to a baby who had done nothing but arrive. I followed the plan without drama because quiet is a boundary too. Spring came to the Midwest with its stubborn, hopeful green. The maples outside burst into small bright leaves that trembled in the afternoon wind. I took my child to the lake and sat on the same bench under the cottonwood. The water lifted and lay down again, tireless and soft. I watched the rowers cut their paths and disappear around the bend. I felt the sun on my face, and the weight of my child sleeping in the carrier against my chest. A warm, steady pressure that pushed grief back into its proper size. I learned to live with the paradox that healing is both fierce and tender. I learned that forgiveness is not a door flung open to those who would still walk in with muddy feet, but a window open to let stale air out. I allowed myself to remember without letting the remembering re-injure me. I allowed myself to grieve the sister I once had, the husband I thought I knew, the version of family I tried to build from fragile pieces that never fit. Then I allowed myself to love what remained. A small, perfect person, with my eyes and a new, honest life, with my own name stamped clearly on the mailbox. This is the life lesson I carry like a talisman, in the pocket of my heart. Secrecy is a slow rot, and truth is both blade and balm. The cut it makes is clean, the healing it brings is real. My silence at the shower was not weakness, it was the first stone in a foundation I am still building. My response that day began as a refusal to dance to someone else's chaos, and it ended as a quiet, stubborn commitment to protect my child, and protect myself. When I tuck my baby into the crib at night, the mobile turns in the faint current of the heating vent. The felt stars brush each other and hum their soft, private music. I stand in the doorway, and let the sight hold me. The house is different now, the walls have learned new echoes. The kitchen carries the clatter of bottles and the soft thud of barefoot steps at 3 a.m. The hallway knows the rhythm of a woman walking from room to room, not to search for proof anymore, but to check on peace. There is a photograph on the dresser of the two of us in that hospital light. My hair is a mess, my face is bare and tired and alive. The baby's mouth is open in the first yawn I ever saw. When I look at that photograph, I do not see what was taken from me. I see what began when I said nothing, when I left the room without giving my pain a voice, when I chose to build instead of burn. I see the curve of a new story rise. My sister announced my husband's secret at my baby shower. She expected me to explode or collapse or perform my devastation for the room. Instead, I answered with structure. I answered with boundaries. I answered with a life that would not bend to her bitterness. The consequence for her lives outside my door. The consequence for him lives in calendars and court orders. The gift for me lives here, within 4 yellow walls, under a turning sky of felt stars, in the soft breath of a child who will grow up knowing that truth can hurt and still be whole. I am not the woman I was before that day. I am quieter, I am stronger, I am more honest about the cost of love and the work of trust. I carry scars, like clean lines across old skin. They remind me that I do not need to hide what I survived to live a beautiful life. I step forward each morning, with a steady heart, and a clear map. The path is not dramatic, it is deliberate, it is mine. Some wounds never fully disappear, but they teach us how to rise differently. My sister thought she ended me, but what she truly did was awaken me. Betrayal became my teacher, silence became my shield, and truth became my freedom. My baby was not born into shame, but into strength. And I have learned that sometimes the most powerful response is not revenge, but rebuilding a life so unshakable that no one can ever take it away again. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you, and do not forget to subscribe to this channel, so you never miss more powerful family drama stories like this one.